Hi everyone and welcome to Asami Rat Care. So today's video is a bit late. I do apologise, I'm being rubbish at the videos at the moment, and the reason is very much these little guys that are keeping me very well entertained at the moment. But yes, so they're going to be keeping us company and helping with this video, aren't you? Your very first proper video. Now you're kind of active. Sorry, get all five out. Oh no, someone's going down my sleeve. Right, so today's video is a continuation of my Substrate series. So this is going to be looking at Hemp and Aspen, and I've grouped those two together because they're very similar in quite a lot of ways. There's pros and cons of each, but they kind of work on a similar basis. They're basically kind of a fibrous or wood material that is basically chopped very finely into a substrate that is a good alternative to shavings, very absorbent. If we go back to, would you like to go and try some? If we go back to kind of our three factors, we have absorbency. So absorbency on hemp and aspen is brilliant. It's probably one of the most absorbent of this kind of litters out there, and I'll zoom in a bit, make sure. I think they're all in my, like, moving into my hood. So you can see here, this is actually aspen. I haven't got any hemp because I don't fancy buying a massive bale. I don't really use it myself at the moment, and I'll explain why later. But it's still quite good stuff. But my local pet shop stocks aspen for reptiles. So basically, the difference between hemp and aspen, other than the fact that aspen is a kind of tree and hemp is a plant, they look and act very similar. Aspen is a bit fluffier, so this kind of like fine fibre is kind of very aspen, whereas something like this little chip here, hemp is like lots of little chips. And there are different kind of brands of kind of hemp and aspen actually. It's quite hard to find aspen in large bales in the UK, but I think it can be done elsewhere. Aspen is a hardwood versus the kind of pine, spruce, softwood shavings that we're looking at that have more kind of like complications around them, let's say. If you're not sure what and you haven't watched the video, watch the video and I'll explain. But phenols are not an issue with hardwoods, so some people prefer to use them and find them safer. Hemp also doesn't have a phenol issue because it's not a wood. It's just a stalk of a plant. Yes, it is a plant used to grow drugs in certain places, but the hemp that we get the stalks from, which is used for bedding, is very much not activated in that sense, and it's generally grown for its seeds, which make very good protein source. In fact, I do add hemp seeds to my mix. Where are you off to, little one? So absorbency is excellent on both of them. I think hemp is generally a little bit more absorbent, but it's one of the best kind of for absorbencies that isn't directly a cat litter or cat litter type product. This is good in some ways. If you kind of got a smell problem, it's a very good way of dealing with it. It can make things a little bit lacking in humidity, so I would not use hemp or aspen in a birthing cage or a baby cage, as much as they're fine playing it. It's not that it's poisonous or anything, it's just really, really absorbent. And what you can get, and I don't have an example because humidity is generally not a problem in the UK. Humidity in here is typically, well, currently it's 60%. But what they can do, if you get a really low humidity environment caused by a highly absorbent bedding, you'll get little rings around their tails, and that can cut off the blood circulation, and actually, if left, can sometimes result in them needing tails amputated. You're a little live wire, aren't you? You're you. Yeah. So you do need to be quite conscious of that. So from an absorbency point of view, it's really good. I just wouldn't use it with very young rats. Once they get a little bit older, they can get away from the substrate a bit more, because it's like a small layer just above the substrate that's particularly kind of dry. Once they're a bit bigger and they're climbing around and such, it becomes less of an issue. But when they're tiny and minute and they can't climb, these guys can climb quite well at the moment, then it's something that you want to consider. That kind of first 2 weeks worth of bedding is quite important. Sorry, substrate. I use these terms interchangeably. It's probably confusing. I apologise. Right, so that's absorbency. Very, very good for that. Better than shavings. A lot better than card. I'm trying to think. League's better than fleece and such, but I don't really count that as a kind of particularly useful normal bedding in terms of absorbency. So next bit on there is kind of allergens, kind of dust, that kind of thing. So this is where hemp and aspen differ a little bit. So aspen is fairly dusty. In fact, I don't know if you can see that. I'll try and do it a bit closer. Move carefully so I don't lose any baby rats. But there's a bit of dust coming out of this, and actually I can smell it, and it's not bad, but it's a little bit like annoying. It can be a little bit dusty, aspen, and it does very much depend on the brand you make, and you can do things like sieve it and kind of ruffle it up to try and get rid of the dust, but it does produce a bit of dust. Hemp is variable. It does depend on what hemp you've got. My personal favourite for hemp is something called Obios. Oh, I'm not sure that you probably pronounce it differently. Nobody can quite agree on how to say it, but it's particularly nice quality hemp. And this is another brand called Hutch Hemp that's very similar. It's both sold in the UK. There's probably equivalents elsewhere. They're very low dust, very nice, clean colour, and I'll explain why that matters. Because there is another brand called Hemcore that I've used in the past, and it tends to be prone to be kind of stained black, which is not a big issue until you realise that's actually mould, and it gets a really kind of dank smell. Plus it's got something added to it. I think it's citronella, which keeps the flies away on horses, but is not good for a rat's lungs. So it does matter what hemp you pick. And I do find that Obios is pretty good for dust, but I've had some rats react to it, and in fact more rats than I have with shavings, which in theory should be worse because of the potential for phenols. I'm a bit like, I have a love-hate relationship with hemp. When I have used it, it's been excellent up until the point where I've had the odd rat that's had an issue with it, and then I've had to kind of switch it out. The other major downside, and this isn't one of my 3 factors, but it's something you really should bear in mind with kind of hemp and other very fine particle beddings. Not from an allergen point of view, from a mess point of view. Hemp has this ability to get everywhere. I remember using it at one point when I had my rat room in the house still, and I stopped using it, and then I think it was 6 months later I was still hoovering it up. Just bits got stuck in the carpet. Absolute pain in the bum. It's just like it's there forever, but it is excellent in terms of absorbency, and if your rats don't have a problem with it, which the majority of them don't, then it's a really good kind of from an allergen point of view. Aspen a little bit more picky. I've used it in the past in digging boxes. I haven't used it all over just because of the dust content, so I don't particularly love it from that, but it's kind of great from a kind of time out, let's have a bit of a play. If you've got rats that aren't particularly irritated, I'll let the babies have a bit of a dig in it. They'll probably quite enjoy that, won't you, Troubles? So that's kind of absorbency. Enrichment wise, I find that it digs fairly well, as in they can dig it and kind of push it out of the way, and they quite enjoy doing that. But the problem is it's very kind of slippy and slidey, the hemp, and kind of just sits very flat. So I much prefer it mixed with something. In fact, what works really well is mixing that with something like card or a kind of fluffy shaving, or even in theory aspen, because that's got a little bit more structure. And I do find that why I use it in digging boxes is they can kind of pile that up and create mounds a bit more, whereas the hemp just kind of goes flump back down again fairly easily. So it's one that I would generally speak from a enrichment point of view. Sorry, baby invasion. You're not allowed down there yet. How are you? Trouble. Both my Dumbos trying to get down my neck. Yeah, so from a kind of enrichment point of view, I prefer using it with something else because it sits a bit flat for me, and that is a preference thing. It's not that it's bad by any means, I just prefer something that can kind of properly be kind of construction engineers just like their owner. Yes, I like them to be able to create those kind of tunnels and mounds and such, and you can't really tunnel in a lot of things that aren't the kind of soil that I'm currently using, but it's still kind of, it's good for them to be able to move it around and construct things and create valleys and such, and it means they're able to be more effective at digging. So from an enrichment point of view, it's better used with something else, but absorbency is one of the best on the kind of market, and irritant wise it's usually okay, but bear in mind that I have, and other people have had, the odd kind of rat that's not got on well with it. So just, I would say if you can, try a small amount first. before you commit to a full bale. And actually hutch hemp is quite good for that if you can find it, because it's sold in small bales, or there's places like Rat Rations that'll sell you a small bag, or make friends with somebody that uses hemp and buy a small bag off them and just see how your rats get on with it. It can be absolutely fine. You're getting quite lively, aren't you, little one? Right, so that's kind of the hemp and obiose. Good option, reasonably cheap if you find it in the big bale format. I think obiose used to cost me about 10 quid-ish. I find it a little bit more expensive than the local cardboard, about equitable with some of the fancier shavings, or green mail, but you can still get kind of some horse shavings cheaper than that are still good quality, and some of your local produced cards seems to be quite cheap apart from the green mail stuff. But yes, so it is all around a good option, just not for everybody, and it is better mixed. I love it as like a base layer under a thick layer of card, because they've got the squishy stuff and then all the moisture trickles down and gets absorbed, so it makes a good kind of like almost a litter in that sense as well. But that's it, and I best stop before this little madam manages to escape somewhere she shouldn't do. So over and out from me and the little babies.